The first time I saw Derek Hutchins peer over my fence, I waved. That was my mistake. I thought we were being neighborly, two homeowners on Maple Grove Lane just chatting about property improvements. He asked about my addition plans with this easy smile, the kind that made you think he was genuinely interested. I told him about the sunroom I'd been designing for months, showed him the rough sketches even. He nodded like he understood the vision, said something about how nice it would look. I didn't know then that he was memorizing every detail, cataloging my ideas like a shopping list. Derek had moved in 6 months earlier, divorced, bitter, always complaining about money. But that afternoon, standing by the fence with sawdust still on my work gloves, I just thought he was being friendly. Sometimes kindness makes you blind to what people really want. And what Derek wanted was everything I'd worked for, without paying the price. 3 weeks later, I started hearing construction noises next door. Not unusual for our neighborhood. People were always updating, renovating, trying to add value before the market shifted. But something felt off about the timing. I'd just finalized my contractor agreement with Build-Right Solutions 2 days earlier. The permits were filed, the drawings were submitted to the county, everything was moving forward. My sunroom was going to be beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the garden, custom cedar beams, a reading nook I'd dreamed about for years. I'd saved for 18 months to afford it. When I walked to the fence line that Saturday morning, coffee in hand, I saw Derek's crew unloading lumber. The dimensions looked familiar. Too familiar. I told myself I was being paranoid, that lots of additions probably looked similar at the start. But my stomach twisted anyway, that instinct you get when something's wrong. By Monday, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Derek's addition was taking shape, and it was identical to mine. Same footprint, same window placement, same roofline angle. I stood in my backyard staring at the framing, feeling sick. He'd copied my design completely, right down to the support beam placement. I grabbed my phone and called my contractor, a guy named Vincent who'd been in business for 20 years. He drove over within an hour, walked the fence line, and his face went dark. "That's your design," he said flatly. "Every detail. Someone gave him your plans." We stood there in silence while hammers pounded next door. Vincent asked if I'd shown the drawings to anyone. My throat went tight. "Just Derek," I whispered. "Just once." Vincent pulled out his phone and started taking photos, told me to document everything, every stage of construction. "This isn't just copying," he said. "This is theft." I didn't confront Derek immediately. Vincent told me to wait, to let him finish building. It felt wrong, watching him steal my dream and hammer it into reality while I did nothing. But Vincent had seen this before, dealt with shady contractors and intellectual property disputes. He explained that if I confronted Derek now, he'd just claim coincidence, say he hired his own designer. "Better to let him finish," Vincent said. "Let him invest everything. Then we move." So I watched. Every morning I'd see Derek strutting around his property, pointing at beams, nodding at workers. He looked so proud, so smug. Once he saw me watching and actually waved, grinned like we were sharing some mutual homeowner success story. I waved back, my smile tight and cold. Inside, I was already building something else. Not a sunroom. A case. And unlike Derek, I had receipts for every single nail. I started documenting everything obsessively. Photos, timestamps, measurements. I pulled my original design drafts, the ones I'd sketched 6 months before Derek even moved in. I had dated notebooks, email chains with Vincent, even the initial consultation notes from the architect I'd hired for structural advice. Every piece of paper got scanned, labeled, organized into folders on my laptop. I created a timeline spreadsheet, mapping when I'd created each design element against when Derek's construction started. The evidence was overwhelming. He hadn't just been inspired by my plans. He'd stolen them completely, probably took photos that day by the fence when I was stupid enough to trust him. My friend Callie came over one evening, found me surrounded by paperwork, and asked what I was doing. Building a trap, I told her. She looked at the photos of Derek's edition, then at my originals, and whistled low. He really just copied everything. I nodded. And now he's going to pay for it. The interesting thing about construction liens is most people don't understand how they work. I didn't either, not until Vincent explained it over coffee at my kitchen table. A mechanic's lien, he said, is what contractors file when they don't get paid. It attaches to the property, clouds the title, makes it nearly impossible to sell or refinance until it's resolved. But here's the part that made my pulse quicken. If someone uses stolen intellectual property to build something, and you can prove it, you can file a lien for the value of that stolen work. Not just the design fee. The entire construction value. Vincent slid a business card across the table, a lawyer named Patricia Odom who specialized in construction disputes. Call her, he said. She'll love this. I held that card for a long moment, feeling the weight of what came next. This wasn't just about getting credit anymore. This was about taking everything Derek thought he'd won. Patricia Odom had an office that smelled like leather and old books, the kind of place that made you feel like justice actually existed. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back and smiled. This is the cleanest theft case I've seen in years, she said. Your documentation is perfect. She explained the process. First, we'd send Derek a cease and desist, informing him that he'd used stolen designs. He'd probably ignore it or deny everything, which was fine. That just strengthened our position. Then, once his construction was complete and he'd invested everything, we'd file the lien. Patricia estimated his addition cost at least $70,000, maybe more. With my documented designs and his clear copying, we could claim the entire value. Plus legal fees. Plus damages. Derek's house would be underwater, legally speaking. He wouldn't be able to sell, refinance, or do anything without settling with me first. How long? I asked. She smiled wider. Let him finish building first. Then we strike. Watching Derek's addition near completion was torture and satisfaction mixed together. He'd installed the windows now, beautiful floor-to-ceiling glass just like I'd planned. The cedar beams were up, stained a rich honey color. It looked exactly how I'd imagined my sunroom would look, except it was on his property, built with his money, using my stolen ideas. He threw a small party when the construction wrapped up, invited a few neighbors. I watched from my kitchen window as people walked through, admiring his new space. Derek stood in the center, gesturing proudly, probably telling everyone how he'd designed it himself. Callie texted me, "You going over there?" I typed back, "No. I'm waiting." She sent a confused emoji. I didn't explain. Some things you have to see to believe, and Derek's world was about to collapse in a way that required no explanation. I just needed the final inspection to pass, the permits to close, everything official. Then Patricia would file the paperwork, and Derek's dream would become his nightmare. The final inspection passed on a Thursday. I knew because I'd been monitoring the county permits system online, refreshing the page like a teenager checking social media. Status: approved. Construction: complete. My hands trembled as I called Patricia. "It's done," I said. She didn't need clarification. "I'll file tomorrow morning," she replied. "By Monday, he'll know." That weekend was the longest of my life. I kept expecting Derek to somehow find out, to see it coming. But he was oblivious, sitting on his new sunroom deck Saturday afternoon, drinking beer and scrolling his phone. Sunday morning he washed his truck in the driveway, whistling. He had no idea that 48 hours earlier, legal paperwork had been filed with the county recorder's office, attaching a construction lien to his property for $82,000. The amount included the estimated construction cost, my design fees, and initial legal expenses. Patricia had been thorough. The lien was ironclad, documented, and about to ruin everything Derek thought he'd achieved. Monday afternoon, Derek got the notice. I was working in my garden when I heard his front door slam open. He stood on his porch holding papers, his face the color of raw meat. I didn't look up, just kept pruning my roses like nothing unusual was happening. I heard him on his phone, yelling at someone. Lawyer probably, or maybe the title company. The words weren't clear, but the panic was. An hour later, he was at my fence. His voice shook when he called my name. I set down my pruning shears and walked over slowly, wiping dirt from my hands. Derek held up the lien notice, his hand trembling. "What is this?" he demanded. I tilted my head, pretending to read it upside down. "Looks like a mechanic's lien," I said calmly. Derek's jaw clenched. "This is insane. You can't just put a lien on my house." I smiled then, not warm, not kind. "Actually," I said, "when you steal someone's intellectual property and use it to build an addition, I can." His face went white. Derek tried denying it first, of course. He sputtered about coincidence, about hiring his own designer, about how I couldn't prove anything. I let him talk himself out, watched him scramble for excuses like a fish on a dock. When he finally ran out of breath, I pulled my phone from my pocket. "I have dated sketches from 8 months ago," I said quietly. "Emails with my contractor from 6 months ago. Architectural consultations from 4 months ago. All before you even started planning your addition." Derek's mouth opened, then closed. "You showed me some drawings by a fence," he tried. "That's not theft." I nodded. "You're right. Looking at drawings isn't theft. But photographing them without permission, then using them as construction plans, that's exactly theft." His eyes flickered. "How did you know I photographed them?" I didn't answer, just held his stare. The truth was I hadn't known for sure until that moment, but his reaction confirmed everything. He'd taken photos that day, probably while I was pointing at something, too trusting to notice. Derek hired a lawyer, some guy named Preston, who sent Patricia a letter full of legal bluster about frivolous liens and harassment. Patricia read it over the phone to me, laughing. "He's got nothing," she said. "They're trying to intimidate us into dropping it." "Will it work?" I asked. She snorted. "Not even close. We have everything documented, time-stamped, witnessed. They'd need to prove you somehow copied yourself retroactively, which is impossible. Preston's letter demanded we remove the lien within 10 days or face a countersuit for defamation and abuse of process. Patricia sent back a response that was basically a professionally worded version of "Bring it on." She attached copies of my original designs, the dated notebooks, the email chains, everything. The message was clear: we weren't bluffing, and we had receipts for days. A week later, Preston went quiet. No countersuit, no follow-up threats. Just silence, which Patricia said was the sound of a lawyer realizing his client was screwed. The lien did exactly what Patricia said it would. Derek couldn't sell his house, couldn't refinance, couldn't even get a home equity loan. The title was clouded, legally tangled until the lien was resolved. I knew this because Callie's sister worked at the title company and mentioned that Derek had tried to refinance twice, both times denied instantly when the lien showed up. He stopped maintaining his yard. Stopped washing his truck. I'd see him sometimes, sitting on that stolen sunroom deck, staring at nothing. His smugness had evaporated, replaced by something hollow. Part of me felt bad. A small part. But then I'd remember him waving at me while his crew built my design, remember his proud grin at that completion party, and the sympathy dried up fast. He'd gambled that I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. He'd bet that being a woman meant I'd be too polite to fight back. He'd lost that bet badly, and now the bill was coming due. 3 months after the lien was filed, Preston reached out to Patricia about settlement. They wanted to negotiate, find a middle ground. Patricia called me immediately. "They're ready to deal," she said. "What do you want?" I'd been thinking about this question since the day I first saw Derek's stolen edition taking shape. Part of me wanted to demand the full $82,000, watch him scramble to refinance or sell just to pay me. But another part, the practical part, knew that dragging this out benefited no one. "I want him to pay for my sunroom construction," I said finally. "The full cost, plus my legal fees to date." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's about $60,000 total," she said. "You'd be leaving $20,000 on the table." "I know," I replied. "But I don't want his money. I want my sunroom built exactly how I designed it, funded by the man who tried to steal it." Patricia laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. "Oh, he's going to hate that." "Good," I said. "Let him hate it." The settlement took 2 weeks to finalize. Derek would pay $58,000 directly to Build Right Solutions to fund my sunroom construction, plus $12,000 in legal fees to Patricia. In exchange, I'd release the lien once the funds cleared and construction began. Patricia built in penalty clauses if he missed payments, additional interest if he delayed. The agreement was brutal and precise. Derek signed it on a Thursday afternoon at Patricia's office. I wasn't there, didn't want to see his face. But Patricia called me right after, said he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He kept asking if there was any other option, she told me. I said no, this or foreclosure. He signed. That night, I sat in my backyard with a glass of wine, looking at the empty space where my sunroom would soon stand. Not soon. Would definitely stand, fully paid for by the neighbor who thought he could steal from me without consequences. The sunset painted everything gold and orange, beautiful and earned. Vincent started construction on my actual sunroom 3 weeks later. The crew arrived early Monday morning, unloading materials with practiced efficiency. I took the day off work, couldn't resist watching the first stages. Derek's truck was in his driveway, but he didn't come outside. Didn't even open his blinds. He knew what was happening, knew that every board being cut, every nail being hammered, was being funded by his settlement payment. Vincent walked me through the timeline, 6 weeks for framing and exterior, 2 more for interior finishing. "It's going to be beautiful," he said, then grinned. "And fully paid for." I laughed, a real genuine sound that surprised me. For months I'd been angry, focused, driven by the need to make this right. Now, watching my actual design come to life, the anger was fading into something better. Not quite satisfaction. More like vindication. Justice didn't always happen in courtrooms. Sometimes it happened in backyards, one stolen plan redeemed at a time. The construction attracted attention naturally. Neighbors would stop by, ask about the addition, comment on the design. I told them the truth, or most of it. Explained that I'd been planning this for over a year, had hired an architect for consultations, worked with Vincent to perfect every detail. Some of them glanced toward Derek's house, and I could see them doing the math. His addition looked identical to mine. Same windows, same beams, same everything. A few asked directly if there was a connection. I smiled and said that sometimes people get inspired by their neighbors, but it's always better to create something original. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Word spread fast in neighborhoods like ours. By the time my sunroom framing was complete, everyone on Maple Grove Lane knew some version of what had happened. Derek became a cautionary tale, the guy who'd tried to cheat and paid for it. Literally. I didn't gloat or gossip. Didn't need to. The houses told the story themselves. My sunroom was finished on a Tuesday in late October. Vincent's crew did the final walkthrough with me, pointing out details and care instructions. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed my garden perfectly, afternoon light streaming through in golden sheets. The cedar beams smelled rich and warm. The reading nook I'd dreamed about sat in the corner, exactly where I'd sketched it months ago. Vincent handed me a binder with all the permits, warranties, and care instructions. "You earned this," he said simply. I nodded, throat tight. The crew packed up their tools, swept the floors one last time, and left. I stood alone in my new sunroom, running my hand along the smooth window frame. This space was mine, truly mine. Not stolen, not copied, not built on someone else's ideas. Every beam, every nail, every pane of glass represented something I'd fought for and won. Through the windows, I could see Derek's addition, identical in structure but hollow in meaning. Mine was filled with justice. His was just filled with regret. Derek listed his house 2 months later. The for sale sign went up on a gray January morning, stark against the winter lawn. I wasn't surprised. The settlement had drained him financially, and living next door to the evidence of his theft probably made every day uncomfortable. Callie texted me a screenshot of the listing. "He's asking way too much," she wrote. "Market's cooled and that addition doesn't add value if everyone knows the story." She was right. The house sat empty of offers for weeks, then months. Derek dropped the price once, then again. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy but not satisfaction either. Just a tired acknowledgement that consequences were real and lasting. I'd gotten my sunroom, gotten justice, gotten everything I'd fought for. Derek had gotten a matching addition and a lesson about respecting other people's work. One of these outcomes was built on solid ground. The other was sinking slowly into debt and reputation damage he'd never quite escape. Spring came, and my garden bloomed around the sunroom like it had been planned that way all along. Roses climbed the fence, tulips lined the stone path, everything green and alive. I started spending mornings there with coffee and a book, exactly like I'd imagined during all those months of planning. The space felt sacred somehow, not because of the construction but because of what it represented. I'd stood up for myself, trusted the process, and watched justice unfold slowly and completely. Friends visited and marveled at the design. I showed them the original sketches sometimes, explained the timeline. Most knew the fuller story by then, had heard through the neighborhood network. They'd nod, understanding without needing details spelled out. Patricia stopped by once, admired the craftsmanship, and raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. "To intellectual property rights," she said with a grin. I clinked my mug against hers. "And to patience," I added. Because that's what it had taken more than anything. The patience to let Derek finish, to build the case, to wait for justice instead of demanding it immediately. Derek's house finally sold in April, nearly 6 months after listing. I saw the sold sign go up and felt a strange closure. He'd moved out weeks earlier, probably staying with family or friends while the sale processed. I never saw him again after that day at the fence when I'd told him about the lien. He'd become a ghost, present only in the identical addition that stood as proof of what he'd done. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler. They introduced themselves one Saturday, seemed nice and completely unaware of the property's history. I didn't tell them. It wasn't relevant to their lives, and they'd bought the house for what it was, not what it represented. But when they commented on how similar our additions looked, I smiled and said mine had been custom designed. They nodded, admiring the craftsmanship visible through my windows. The wife mentioned they'd gotten a good deal on the house. "I bet you did," I thought but didn't say. Derek's desperation had become their opportunity. That's how consequences work sometimes. A year after the lien was filed, I got a message request on social media. Derek Hutchins wanted to connect. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. I opened the message. It was short, typed probably after several drafts and deleted attempts. "I'm sorry for what I did. I was wrong, and I paid for it. I hope your sunroom is everything you wanted." I stared at the words for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply with anger, remind him of every frustration and violation. But mostly I just felt tired. The fight was over. The war was won. Responding would just reopen wounds that had finally started healing. I closed the message without replying, blocked his profile, and went back to my life. Some apologies don't require acceptance or acknowledgement. Some people just need to live with what they've done, carry that weight forward. Derek would carry his. I'd already let mine go the day Vincent's crew finished construction. That was enough resolution for both of us. These days, I work in my sunroom most afternoons. I'd transitioned to freelance design work, which meant flexible hours in a home office that overlooked beauty instead of cubicle walls. The irony wasn't lost on me, building a career around original creative work in a space I'd fought to protect from theft. Clients would sometimes video call and comment on my background, the light, the aesthetic. I'd thank them and not mention the story behind it. But I thought about it often, about how close I'd come to just accepting the theft, staying quiet because confrontation felt uncomfortable. Vincent's advice to document everything, Patricia's expertise in construction law, my own stubborn refusal to let Derek get away with it, all of that had built something bigger than a sunroom. It had built proof that standing up for yourself wasn't just noble or right. It was practical and possible. You just needed patience, evidence, and the willingness to see it through when easier paths appeared. Callie visited last month, brought wine and takeout like old times. We sat in the sunroom as evening light faded, talking about everything and nothing. Eventually, conversation turned to Derek, as it sometimes still did. "You ever regret how hard you went after him?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. There'd been moments during the legal process when I'd wondered if I was being vindictive, if I should just accept a smaller settlement and move on. But sitting in this space, built exactly as I'd envisioned, funded by the person who'd tried to steal it, I knew the answer. "Not for a second," I said. Callie nodded, sipped her wine. "Good," she replied. "Because that whole situation taught me something too." She paused, looking around the sunroom. "What's that?" I asked. She met my eyes. "That quiet people aren't weak. They're just waiting for the right moment to show everyone what they're actually made of." I smiled, raised my glass. "To right moments," I said. We clinked glasses as stars appeared outside the windows, everything peaceful and earned. Sometimes I stand in my sunroom at sunset and look toward where Derek's addition sits on the neighboring property. The new owners have decorated it differently, added plants and different furniture, made it their own. It doesn't look like my space anymore except in structure, in the bones of the design I created and he stole. But that's the thing about theft. You can copy the appearance, but you can't replicate the meaning. My sunroom means patience and justice and standing firm when people assume you'll fold. Derek's copy meant shortcuts and consequences and the permanent mark of someone who thought stealing was easier than creating. I'd chosen the harder path, the one that required documentation and legal fees and months of watching him build my dream on his property. And I'd do it again without hesitation, because some battles aren't just about winning. They're about proving that original work matters, that creators deserve protection, that theft always, eventually costs more than the thief expects to pay. The sunset painted my windows gold, and I stood in that earned light, finally at peace.